Hey guys, this is Eric Weingarten with Weingarten Racing. So I watched the Steve Morris video, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you, since we're a few seconds into this video, yeah, the thumbnail was kind of a clickbait thing. I'm not going to lie about that, but I do want to address what he said, and this is not against Steve Morris at all. So, Steve Morris, if you're watching, which I hope you do, please don't take this as offensive at all. But I actually want to thank you because you made me think. So there's two things in life that I enjoy the most. Thinking is one of them. So if something makes me want to think about something and get engaged, that's a huge thing for me. So I do thank you for that. So really, and I'm going to help you out because you helped me out. So small joys in life, something that makes me think. So I'm going to give you something to help you. But anyway, for the rest of you, here's what he done. He posted a little video and I've taken a small cut of it. And I don't like necessarily when people take cuts because it doesn't have a lot of context. But I think this right here, this cut scene that I'm gonna show you from this latest video is what I'm really talking about because I actually did what he said. So let me show you this, just 2 minutes of his video, and then I can show you what I did. But it's pretty much explaining this. So watch this 2 minutes and then we'll go to it.
I'll put this out there. I don't think flow numbers mean anything. Okay? It's just a little reference number. It's the things that people work on and do. Because it doesn't work that way. In real world, it just doesn't work that way. The valve, intake valve and exhaust valve are opening, closing, and it's sending pulses and waves back and forth. It is not a blowing. It's just this constant, oh yeah, look, we've made it perfect. Hear how it's like, oh, it's nice and it flows more. I don't really freaking care. I'm looking for volume and shape is the primary thing because that intake valve is opening up. So imagine how fast this intake valve opens up and then closes and then sends a pulse back up the intake port, right? So that is just factual. That is what it does. So the amount of air that can get into that when the valve opens and then closes, in that you can figure out the math. It's astronomically fast. Figure out the math here, okay? How fast that valve opens up at, say, 7,000 RPM, okay? How long it's open. And it is hundredths of a second, just off the top of my head, okay, of how long that's open. So it doesn't have time. It doesn't even have time to get air. I will guarantee you it cannot get air that is sitting right here. So pretend the air is sitting right here. The valve opens up. It doesn't have enough time for the air to go to here. It definitely doesn't have enough time to see air signal all the way up into the plenum area. All right. Anyways, we're getting way in the weeds. I talk about that quite a bit. But
I'm going to try to do the math. All right, so I'm wearing my Seriously Wrong shirt. It's actually the name of my son's car, but I'm probably seriously wrong with this math. For the record, I actually have a college degree. So I have a Bachelor of Science in Elementary Education, which you're like, well, that has nothing to do with what you're about to talk about. It should be noted that I took 6 years of college. Only 4 of them were for elementary education. I wasted about 2 years in a different degree program. It made me take a lot of science classes I didn't need to take to be an elementary education teacher at all. However, it's been 23 years since I graduated college. So there's a good chance that some of these equations and this whole thing is completely wrong. So I'm going to preface it by saying that. But I'm going to go through how I thought about it and how to answer the question. Because essentially what Steve Morris had said, there are 2 things we need to think about. One, the time that the intake valve is actually open. At 7,000 RPMs, exactly how much time in seconds is that intake valve open? There are some assumptions we have to make because I don't know his cam card, which he didn't have to give that away, but we'll make an assumption there. So that's one of the bigger ones. The second thing we have to figure out besides time is how much actual airflow passed through that in that time. And from that, we need to figure out how much volume of air. That's the bigger thing. Because he said that cylinder head, he doesn't think the air from the top of the intake head port to the end gets in the time that valve opens. And that, I think, is wrong. But all that made me think. So here's where we go. Follow along as I go nuts, because you can see a whole lot of wrong. This was literally 2 a.m. in the morning when I was working on this. So I'll run through my thought process and go through it, and you're like, you confuse the crap out of me. Trust me, I am too. All right, first off, it says 7,000 RPM. That's great, but the crank turns about half the speed, right? And I was like, okay, you can do it by half. But then I'm like, wait a minute. We actually, when we have the crank, our cam carb, we measure the duration that the intake valve is open in crank degrees, not in cam degrees. So the half thing goes out the window, you would think. That was my first line of thought. So it'd be half. But then I'm like, this is pointless anyway, because after all, it's 2 a.m. So then I had this whole idea, well, if you take 300 degrees of advertised cam duration divided by the 360 total rotation, you would get the ratio that the valve is open of the time in the whole entire rotation that the intake valve is open. It came out to 83.3, and I was like, that sounds stupid too, because the valve is not open 83.3% of the time. So then I went to, okay, wait a minute, whoa. We need to back up here. So what I did was I take 360 degrees times 7,000 RPM. So engine turns over 360 degrees times 7,000 RPMs. So how many degrees has it travel in that 7,000 turns that it makes? Well, that's how many. And then I'm like, okay, now let's make a ratio of the time that the intake valve is actually open. We can't say per 1 degree, because if you did it by 1 turn, there's always a turn when the intake valve is not going to be open. This isn't a 2-cycle engine. This is a 4-stroke. So if we take, and this is the ballpark. Why the advertised duration of 300? It's a guess. I don't have his cam card. We use 50 thousandths when we spec cams, but that's not actually when the valve's open. They advertise closer. And you might say advertises at 6 thousandths. That assumes that there's some flex, but we'll get off the tangent on that. I'm assuming his advertised duration is 300 degrees. It's probably more of crank degrees. Since it's a 4-stroke engine, of those total degree times, 300 that the intake's open, of the 720, that's 2 rotations. That's 41.66% of the time the intake valve is open. So now that I know the percent of the time that the intake valve's open, which is about 42%, I need to know how many seconds that it actually is open. Then I can multiply it by this, 41.66 or whatever, and we can figure out the exact time that the intake valve's open. Well, here's how I did that. At 7,000 RPM, that's minute. There's 60 seconds in a minute. So we take 60 and we divide it by 7,000. That gives you 0.00857. That's how many seconds that is to do all those durations, all those degrees. So if you take 41% of 0.00857, that comes to 0.00357 seconds that the intake valve's open at 7,000 RPM. This gives us our first part of the problem. How much time? So now we know how much time it is. It's 3 thousandths of a second that the intake valve is actually opened at 7,000 RPM. So he's correct. It's actually less than 1/10 of a second. It's way less. It's a very, very small amount of time that this intake valve is actually open at 7,000 RPM. But that's only one. How much air goes through that engine in that time? All right, or through that valve? Well, that one's a different one. Now, first thing I was thinking, okay, he said the flow benches, he says they're not helpful. Well, we can go into a different thing on that. But I was like, well, let's look at the flow of the head and blah, blah, blah. Then I was like, I don't have to even do that. Because the problem with the flow benches is they're measured in inches of water. And the engine pulls way more than that. So for instance, this pulls 28 inches is industry standard. If you were to do it on a running engine, it'd be far, far above that. So you'd have to do a conversion and whatnot. But I don't even have to do that. That was a waste of time. So here's what I mean. I have a 540 dyno mule. And whenever I do, this is not from the 540. I just happen to have this one here. But we put an air hat on. If you look at the thumbnail, you actually saw an air hat on the 540. And this is back when we had a 1,000 CFM carburetor on it. And the air hat itself measures how much air is going in the engine. So it's actually measuring it. Now, if you watch Steve Morris's video, he doesn't have an air hat on it. So this is the second estimate. I feel like this is fairly accurate though, but the air hat will tell me how many CFM. This is from a 406. So we were able to measure a 669. Well, I went and looked at my 540 dyno mill that I have. And now, granted, it was making more than his. I think it was like 920 at the time. But on the 4150, carburetor is pulling 989 CFM or something like that. I got it written down on this backside because I got to figure out how much air has gone through. Yeah, 989. So granted, not the same as Steve's, but because I have no idea what Steve did. But because that's way better than using the flow bench because that's actually what the engine took in. And this is where things get a little weirder. That's cubic feet per minute. But again, we need cubic feet per second. So things get way off the weed. So anyway, blah, 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 cubic feet per second, because that's better, not minute. 16.483, okay, blah, blah, blah. Now I'm going to convert it to cubic inches, and that's where I was like, wrong, just to figure out it was all wrong. Instead, what I had to do is cubic feet per second, because I was trying to give you, remember, this is cubic inches, right? Feet. So this is cubic feet per second, but we need to get to inches, then we need to get to cc's. Because the thing he said was, I don't think that the volume of this runner will go into the engine in the time that the valve is open. We measure the head volume in cc's, but we're in the standard unit for measurement, which is feet and inches. So we have to do a lot of conversions. So this is going to be, like I said, off the weeds. First, I had to convert it to, instead of minute per minute, CFM, cubic feet per minute, to cubic feet per second. That's 16.48 because you divide it by 60. Now we have to convert it to one. We had to, I'm trying to remember all I did. Yeah, there's a little bit thing different here because I know I messed up completely wrong. So I was like, oh, simple. To convert it to cubic inches, all you have to do is multiply it by 12. Wrong, because it's cubed. It's times 3. So this is our cubic inches, cubic feet per second. Now let's convert it to cubic inches. So it's actually times 12, times 12, times 12. And that gets you this big number of 28,476.62 cubic inches per second. There. All right. So there's part of it. We're still not cc's though. So ignore that little part there right now. However, we needed to get to cc's, and that's where I'm going to have to go over here because then I figured out another problem, so I had to start on a new piece of paper. So the 28,462 cubic inches, gotcha. Remember that time, 41%, 6% of the time? Well, since we're not in one, this is a whole second that it did. We only did 0.00357 seconds that the valve's actually open. So in that time, the cubic inches actually turns into that once we multiply by the time it's open. Because we're not open a full second, we're open that much of a second. This is the amount of time. So it's cubic inches. This is how many cubic inches it moved in the same time, which is 101.68 cubic inches. We have to convert it to cc's. So to do that, you multiply by 16.387064. Not that it matters. And that gives you 1,666.32 cc's. So in his statement, he said, I don't think the air would move from the top of the intake port into the intake port in that time. According to the math, you've moved 1,666.32. His cylinder head is 335 cc's, or dramatically larger. But you're like, wait a minute, the air hat measures all 8. You're correct. So if we divide it by 8, it's only 208 cc's, but that's a bad assumption. Wrong assumption. Why? Because during that time, not all 8 intake valves are open at the same time. We can go back to this ratio. Of the degrees, 41.66% of the time that valve's open. So if you say, hey, this is the total amount of air that was dropped in, that actually went in, only 41% of that comes through, that's 694 cc's, or way more than 335 cc's. So not only does it pull in all the air from the entire head, and that's also the intake manifold volume runner that's above it in that 0.00357 seconds. It will bring in more than that. Now, can my math be wrong? Absolutely, because I'm probably missing some part of this that's wrong. And most of you probably missed it because, like, I don't understand what you're doing with these dang numbers, but it's driving me nuts. But I'm 92% certain that more volume goes through that head than, or through that valve, than that entire intake runner is in the time that the valve is open. So there, I have to say it. Math says I think he's wrong, and someone's going to say, "Well, you're wrong," and they're probably give it a better. But I still think it's going to come up the same. The one thing I feel confident that I probably made a mistake on when I was doing that last part that you saw there is, and I just don't have enough time to keep working on this. That total volume, whatever. Granted, not all 8 are open, but there's definitely more than one valve that's open. So the problem that's going to happen is we know the total amount of air that's now coming through. Of that, how much goes through the valves? How much of the valves are open on each cylinder? The intake valves on all 8, and then that divide by that total volume that went through. So worst case scenario is 204, but that's impossible because not all 8 valves are open, obviously, at the same time. I don't have enough brain power or time right now to figure out exactly how much it is. But even with the math that I have and ballparking like I kind of did, because that's the part I think that's got some error part to it, is the last part, is how much cc's went through that one intake valve, because there's multiple that are open. But regardless, it gives us enough to know that it's more than likely than not more than 335 cc's, which means that whole intake volume passed through. Okay, so Steve Morris, I hope you don't feel like I attacked you. I'm actually thanking you, so thanks for giving me something to think about. So it gets your mind off everything else when you got a problem. At least it does for me. And this is a nice problem. This isn't like, crap, I'm gonna lose money problem. Because since you're in business, you understand what I mean by that. Because there's a lot of times all we do is fix problems, and somehow we lose money every time. This, you just gave me something to think about for fun. So thank you for that. But don't feel like I attacked you, please. Not at all. But since you gave me something that helped. And actually helped me think about something else on the cylinder head part too. Because it made something think in my head. The biggest thing it had me thinking of, the reason why, and the flow bench stuff, the reason why we use it, it's a tool. Just like your dyno. I don't know how many people have told me the same thing when I do dyno tests. They're like, hey, the dyno doesn't measure it like it does at the racetrack. I mean, you're right, it doesn't. And so does the flow bench, doesn't measure exactly like it's on an engine. But it is a tool that we're able to use to get some more information out of it. But it's how we use it. So when I looked at that stuff that you had said, though, I was like, oh my gosh, something else kind of clicked. So your thought made me think of something else, which is great. Thank you. So if you ever wonder why things so close to the valve, and this is not just necessarily for Steve, but why the movement around the valve is so critical to making power and makes so much of a difference compared to something else. Like, for instance, you could change your air cleaner, and I don't care what they say, you're not gaining 30 horsepower, but I probably can alter this valve job and gain 30 horsepower. Because what we just did with the math, 694 cc's will pass through there. What spot will it touch every time? The valve job. The valve job is touched by all the air that goes through. It's in that time. So 694 cc's, all of it will be seen by that valve job. All 694 will pass right through that. The other parts won't see as much of the air coming through. They only have that shock. They're not constantly being moved. That's why the valve job and the area of the chamber and all that area around the valve job, the 1 inch before and after, becomes so important, because that's where all your air is moving first. It sees all the air. So you're like, well, so does the rest. Yeah, but the first movement's from the valve job. So it's everything, and the chamber. So you made me think of that. And it also kind of works out with the math as far as like, it made me think of some other stuff, and I'm probably just spitballing here, but how much of the volume of the head and how important that stuff is. Because I know the further upstream you get, the less important it gets. This is super critical. So thank you for that again. But I want to help you out. So I watched your video, and I'm not at all trying to be critical. But I had 2 questions, and they may seem critical. But I'm going to come back to those after I help you out. What I have here is, this is a small block Chevy head, and granted, I know you're used the AFR Enforcer head. And that one, for those that don't know, the rest of the audience, AFR makes the Enforcer head. That's a Chinese casting. It's machined in China, assembled in the United States. However, Steve Morris then reassembled it and did all that stuff himself. You did some blending and stuff too, but I've got to tell you, I wish you had a flow bench, because that valve job that you see on this head right here, that's the same valve job profile that's on your AFR Enforcer, because that valve job was done in China from the same place that does this small block Chevy one. Your biggest, and this is the reason the helpful for the flow bench, the biggest gain from this head, and I hate to say it, wasn't your grinding. You could have gained more with the valve job, the cutter. So I want to help you out. It would have saved you hours, like literally hours, especially Brock, who had to digitize that. As me, that someone's going through the CNC process with all this stuff, pain in the rear. It's, yeah, I bet you Brock hated you, because it's rough. It's rough. But when you do all that stuff, you're like, oh, that's got to make a big difference, right? You're going to grind the valve guide, and then you take out this little lip that you have inside there. That's probably what you did too. Now, I've seen the AFR Enforcer head. That's got a lot of garbage around the guide. So you're like, oh my gosh, if you remove that, you're going to gain so much air. I've done that, and on the flow bench, I know it doesn't gain as much as you think. But what does gain? The valve job. Now, you have a Rottler, and I have a Robbins. Robbins actually made the Rottler seat and guide machine, which means our tooling is the same. If you would like for me to come up there, you want to fly me up there, I'll cut the valve job, or you can send the head down. I'll flow it like you have it. I'll redo the valve job and blend it in. And I'm telling you, it will gain. Matter of fact, since you've already gone on it, we'll know exactly how much it changes with just the valve job. And I'm not saying that you guys don't know what you're doing. Obviously you do. You're doing a great job and whatnot. But from a cylinder head standpoint, the valve job is the first thing. Because after all the air passes through that first. That's the very first, gets more air passes through that. The super critical. So if you change that, you would have gained more airflow than the grinding you did. And you would really save yourself hours. And I know it sounds like I'm being critical. I'm not. I really am trying to help you, because I know you are a very busy man. You've got a lot going on. You cannot be spending the time to grind it. Even then, you got to pay Brock, to digitize after you ground. And as you know, and I know, that in itself is a real torture test, because especially on the Chinese heads, when you go to transfer it to the other port, they don't always line up. Sometimes it takes more and off, because you would think that all the guide locations are exactly the same. They're not. Fighting that right now. So, yeah, it would have saved you and Brock a lot of time. So, anyway, I just wanted to help you out with that. So, again, if you could email me, I'll help you out anyway, buddy. And I'm not saying you need help. I'm just offering it because you made me think, and I don't get that very often. I don't watch movies that typically don't make me think. I want something that makes me, intellectually stimulates me. And that's why I'm even doing what I do here with this cylinder heads. How can a person spend hours and hours in the grinding room doing what they do, get covered with metal and having a mask on their face for hours and hours on end? Because it intellectually stimulates me trying to figure out what this stuff does and how it changes and things like that. So I want to, if I can help you, I will. And, but thanks for that. My only two criticisms I had, it's about your engine, and I had to ask. So please don't take this wrong either. The two things I had to ask, this is your budget build, your bracket build. Like your block choice, great. Crank choice, Scat, great for bracket stuff. Rods from Scat, great choice. Race Tech pistons, great choice. My two things I don't understand what you did, and I kind of get it and kind of don't, but hear me out. You put Black Mamba lifters in there, which I sell and so does the world, but I prefer BAM. Those are about $400 more than the needle bearing ones. And I know you're like, well, the reliability is so much better with those. 100% correct. But on a bracket engine, those guys typically don't idle. What kills bearings, the needle bearings and the lifters, are idle time. That's why we don't like them on drag and drive stuff. So I don't understand the spending $400 on extra for the black mono, unless you're saying, well, I just don't want it to come back. And that point I would get. But I have a little question there about that. The second thing is the Jesel Sportsman shaft rockers. Reliability, 100%. They're great, fantastic. Also, probably about, all said and done, about $500 more than a good stud mount system that's reliable with your stud girls. I'm a huge fan of shaft rockers and all that, but as a budget build, those two things would have saved you $900 about. And bringing it to the point of this, because I'm a cylinder head guy, I saw you put on the Enforcer heads, and I was like, because probably a year and a half ago, I had done a dyno test with Nick from DZ Performance on the 496 that he had, which is the dyno mule, and we tested a lot. And one of the things was the AFR Enforcer head that you have, and also the Rotos Race Right 270s and the 294s, the AFR 265 oval port, the Promax 290s, and the Promax 317s. So 3 of those heads are Chinese, the Enforcer and those Promaxes. The head that finished almost the worst was that AFR Enforcer. So it was one of the worst. I say that because if you look at the money you had $900. If you just done those other things, you gone with the needle bearing lifter that would have been fine for a bracket builder, truly would have, especially since those guys check their lash more often. You did that, and then if you did stud mount rockers, you could have spent the $900 extra and got the AFR 345cc head that's as cast. And you probably, I don't know the difference off the top of my head. That head's, I know, a little bit more expensive than the Enforcer. It's not as expensive as their full CNC head. But what I do know is that head would have gained, you'd be over 900 right now. It's a much better head. So in my opinion, and then granted, this is my opinion, you build way more engines than I do. I've stopped building, I just do cylinder heads now. But I think you would have been better off to offer and that head, by the way, the 345 is American. You would have been better off to do that head with a needle bearing lifter and stud mounts and rockers and made more power, and the reliability probably would be very, very, very similar. And you would have made more power. So, and the cost would have been the same, is what I'm trying to say. So you would have sold the same engine that makes more power. So instead of advertising one that made 870, you would have been able to advertise one more likely made like 920. So the same cost. Anyway, that's my only criticism. And I would understand if you bash me. You're like, you don't build engines. You don't know what I'm talking about. You're right, I don't build engines anymore. And more power to you, because I don't know how people make money at all doing it. But anyway, long video. Sorry about that. But keep doing what you're doing. Steve, please don't take offense to this. I really do appreciate you making me think. So I was up to like 2 a.m. on this, really. And then this morning I got up and still was like working on it because I found some more errors. Someone else is probably going to find 15 more. But again, thank you, Steve. And keep doing what you're doing. Remember, I'm no Superman. I did race Superboy. I don't pour cast iron heads. You guys take care.